After 2 weeks of use and testing, I think that the iPhone 15 Plus is the best iPhone 15 upgrade this year. And if you want to buy a new iPhone and you're considering which one to get, this one has seriously impressed me. Now, last year, the iPhone 14 Plus was quite a disappointment for a number of reasons, and it was actually the worst selling iPhone, selling even worse than the minis that it replaced. So how in just a year do I go from my least recommended iPhone to my most recommended one? Well, the first thing has to do with price. We're still at the same $900, but the 15 Pro Max now starts at $1,200. So now it's a much bigger spread in terms of price if you want that larger screen. Now, of course, it comes with 128 gigs of storage instead of being forced to have 256, but 128 is enough for most people. Now, as far as the design, there have actually been quite a bit of changes. We're still using aluminum like before, but we have these nice curved edges, which just fit more comfortably in your hand. Now, as far as weight, this thing feels great because for the size, it is actually quite lightweight, lighter than the Max phones. Now with that, I have to comment on the new back glass. The color is actually embedded into the glass, which is really nice. And for years, Apple had shiny backs on the regular iPhones, and that means you could see a ton of fingerprints, especially if you have a darker color, and it just looked ugly. Now we have this matte that is very fingerprint resistant. Even on the sides of the frames, it just looks much better than if you get a Titanium Pro Max. So I think that is really nice. And with that, a lot of people complain about the huge camera bumps on iPhones. And even though we had some massive upgrades, the bump size is exactly the same. So it's not huge, it's not gonna rock like crazy on your desk. Now we also have USB Type-C, which is a huge upgrade from Lightning, the first time Apple switched over in so many years, and that just makes it so much more convenient if you have other devices. Now it does suck that it is a USB 2 speed in here, but realistically for most people that are considering a regular iPhone, they are just going to be using it for charging. Now, one of the most impressive things that shocked me are the updates to the display. Of course, we have the dynamic island now instead of the notch that we've had for years, so that's a huge noticeable difference. But we were not expecting Apple to use the same high quality screen as in the Pro phones to go from 1000 nits in regular usage up to the same 2000 nit peak brightness, which is so nice outside, beating out most Android phones. And with that HDR from 1200 up to 1600, the same quality as in the Pro phone. So if you have an older iPhone, this difference is huge. Now, yes, a big controversy is that Apple is still using 60 Hertz on these phones in 2023, and that does suck, I agree. But if you're somebody that doesn't have ProMotion in an iPad, or if you haven't used a Pro phone, you're not gonna notice the difference. So I don't think that's a huge deal, but not having always on display does kind of suck a bit, and you gotta ask yourself if that is worth it to spend a lot more money. Now, one reason I really like this phone is that Apple made a major upgrade to the speakers. The regular iPhone lineup have always had worse speakers than the Pros, but this year, just with the Plus, not the regular 15, they upgraded it to match the 15 Pro Max, which also had a big improvement from the year before. So if you use your phone for media or for gaming, with this large display and the speakers, the experience is awesome. Now with that, we have to talk about battery life. Now last year, the 14 Plus was rated better than the Pro, but when I did a real world test that included real world applications, the difference was practically the same. But this year, the 15 Plus is amazingly good. Mr. Who's the Boss did a crazy in-depth test, and not only you did real world usage, and in his, he got 13 hours and 19 minutes of battery life compared to 11 hours and 41 minutes for the 15 Pro Max. That is insane, and this is the best battery life that he has ever tested in a smartphone, and it's not even packed with a 5,000 or 6,000 milliamp hour battery. So if you care about battery life, this is awesome. And that is because of the updates. For example, we have the A16 in here, so that's a little bit better. And with that, we have the Qualcomm X70 modem. And if you don't know what that is, that's how you connect to a cellular tower. So that actually saves power compared to last year. And for many years, the cheaper iPhones actually had worse modems than the Pro models. But this year, they are all the same, and you'll get quite a bit of better performance both indoors and outdoors than you do with the previous model. So as you guys can see, the Plus is really going into Pro territory, and not only in that way. Now, as far as performance, the A16 isn't that far off from the A17 Pro, which is a great thing. You're not missing out on a lot. Now, of course, you're not going to get the ray tracing or metal effects, but unless you're going to play the highest end games that are not even out here yet, you want to maximize it, most people aren't going to care and still going to do an excellent job. Now, a huge talk this year was thermal throttling. We covered it a bunch of times, and all phones will slow down, but what shocked me is that the 15 Plus, it actually performed a lot better than the Pro Max. Now, while both of them did dim their screens when I really pushed a hard load on them, the 15 Plus actually went to full brightness in just 30 seconds compared to 2 minutes on the 15 Pro Max. And why is that happening? Well, first off, this chip does use less power, but with that, because it's using aluminum, that does help dissipate heat. And aluminum is actually 16 times better at transferring heat than titanium. So heat can spread out to the edge and then it'd be dissipated a lot better. So if you're worried about throttling, that is really nice. And now I have to talk about cameras because this thing is so impressive. It's the biggest jump that we have seen in such a long time and probably ever for a regular iPhone. Apple put in the same 48 megapixel resolution camera. Now the sensor is different, but it's actually newer than on the 15 Pro Max, and that allowed them to get 2x crops for portraits. And this is something that I've been asking for years now. With the regular iPhones, you could only do wide ones and then you can crop. Most people would just get closer to their subject, and because of that, you'd have warping. And here's an example that's a little bit extreme, but it shows what happens. And now you can put it into 2x mode, still get insane quality, and it's just so much nicer. Now, of course, having 48 megapixels also gives you a ton more detail, but what it also really helps with is for zooming. None of these regular iPhones have telephoto lenses. You have the ultra wide and the main camera, and because of that, it has to be a digital crop. But with 48 megapixels, you can now crop into 15 times instead of 5 times when you're taking the photo. So that kind of negates the need to have a 3x lens. This really fixes the zoom issue. Now, with that, we also got 24 megapixel images, and that is amazing and better than most Android phones. That gives you better quality, and that also works in both portrait modes, and if you're taking a live photo, you also get much better quality, which you cannot do that even with a 14 Pro Max. With that, Apple also gave you the ability to add portrait mode after the fact because it saves depth data. So that is really cool, something you couldn't do before or with the 14 Pro series. So as far as taking photos, this thing is so good. As long as you don't need that crazy zoom, it does such an amazing job. We also have Smart HDR5, better dynamic range, and it is just super impressive. Now, of course, we don't have Apple RAW or ProRes with log, but even for me, somebody who's a power user and a photographer, I rarely use these features. So 99% of regular people will not care. So last year, the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus, they were minimal upgrades, and the 14 Plus didn't really make sense because you could spend just a little bit more and get the Pro Max. But this year, the price difference is bigger, but Apple packed in way more upgrades into the 15 Plus. Plus, even compared to the regular 15, which makes it such a great value. So if you're on the line between which one to buy out of the whole series, maybe you don't want to spend the extra money on a 15 Pro Max, or you want something that's just a little bit more simple. You don't need all the extras. I think this thing is an absolute great value this year if you've been waiting to upgrade. You guys let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Click that circle above to subscribe. Check out one of those great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next one.